Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk about Russian oil and the fact that Russian oil is being refined by countries such as India, China, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. And then those refined oil products are being sold onto the West. So basically what's happening is these countries are buying the raw material directly from Russia, changing the form of it and then selling it on as a completely different product. And the fact that these countries are doing this is circumnavigating all of the bans that have been put in place by the West that are designed to reduce the amount of income that Russia is receiving. So in today's video, we'll talk about the oil refining process, how crude oil is transformed into things like gasoline and diesel. We'll have a look at what's been happening to Russian oil exports over the course of the last 12 months. We'll have a look at a report that's been produced by the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, which estimates that around $50 billion worth of oil products have been produced using Russian crude oil and then sold on to the West over the course of the last 12 months. We'll then go on to specifically look at what's been happening in India, China, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates, which at face value seems like a strange addition to the list because the UAE has its own oil. So we'll answer the question as to why the UAE is buying oil from Russia. And then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think the implications of all of this are for the global economy and what's likely to happen over the course of the next 3 to 6 months.
What are refined products? Refined petroleum products are fuels distilled from crude oil and other liquids. After crude oil is removed from the ground, it is sent to a refinery, where different parts of the crude oil are separated into usable petroleum products. Some examples of petroleum products include gasoline, distillates such as diesel fuel, heating oil, and jet fuel, as well as fuel oil, petrochemical feedstocks, waxes, lubricating oils, and asphalt. These refined products are then put to use in a variety of ways, such as heating, paving roads, generating electricity, and as feedstocks for petrochemical and plastics production. Most refineries focus on producing transportation fuels, the largest use category for petroleum products. Approximately 50% of all refinery output in the United States was gasoline. Distillate fuels represented the second largest category at close to 30%. So how do refineries convert oil into the various products? All refineries have 3 basic steps: separation, conversion, and treatment. During the separation process, the liquids and vapors separate into petroleum components called fractions, based on their weight and boiling point in distillation units. Heavy fractions, such as asphalt and residual fuel oil, separate lower down in the distillation unit, while the lighter fractions, such as gasoline and naphtha, vaporize and rise to the top. Following distillation, heavy fuels can be processed further through cracking to obtain higher value products. The final step in the refining process is to bring products up to pipeline and market standards through blending and treating. For instance, refineries and blenders combine gasoline blending components and ethanol to obtain finished retail gasoline.
So as you've just seen, crude oil needs to go through the refinery process to produce the finished products that we use in our vehicles and homes. And the problem that the West has is that once crude oil has been refined, it is absolutely impossible to be able to find out where that crude oil originated from. And the oil refinery industry is big business in countries like China, India, and Turkey, because you don't need to have your own oil to be refining it. You can just take delivery of crude oil, pass it through your refinery process, and that means that you're adding value, and therefore the industry can become profitable in its own right, even if a country doesn't have its own oil. And over the course of the last 12 months, a lot of these countries have been increasing their purchase of Russian crude oil because the price has been very low. It's been trading at a discount in the international markets. And that's provided the opportunity to refine this cheap raw material into the finished products and then sell those products into the countries that have banned the import of Russian oil. Now, before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Blinkist. One of the objectives of my channel is to pull together information from a variety of different sources, amalgamate it, and then deliver it to you in an easy to listen to format. And the Blinkist app does exactly this. The Blinkist app has over 5,500 non-fiction books and podcasts in its collection, and you can learn everything about those in less than 15 minutes. And one thing that I've been using Blinkist for is to expand my investment strategies. Since Blinkist first contacted me, I've been using the app. And whilst you can read the summaries either on your phone or your tablet or your PC, you can also listen to audio versions, which is absolutely fantastic because it means you can do it while you're doing other things. And following on from the last time we spoke about Blinkist, when I was reading Losing My Virginity by Richard Branson, I'm now reading the sequel, Finding My Virginity, which includes the full details of his Virgin America airline.
Virgin America fought hard to become one of the world's best airlines, and its sale was heartbreaking. The sale broke Branson's heart, since it turned out that Alaska had no interest in keeping the Virgin spirit alive.
And a really great new feature that Blinkist offers is Blinkist Spaces, which allows you to create a space with friends or family where you can recommend titles to each other, and all members of a shared space can access all titles in the space with or without a Blinkist Premium subscription. And Blinkist is currently offering Joe Blogs viewers a 25% discount and a 7-day free trial. So why don't you give it a try by clicking on the link below? This report, produced by the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, claims that Western countries that have largely banned the import of oil from Russia have imported around $50 billion worth of oil products from countries that have increased their purchases of Russian oil over the last 12 months. And this chart shows a graphical presentation of how that's happened. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the crude oil, which is originating in Russia. We then have countries that have been buying it. So we've got the UAE in red at the top, Turkey in turquoise, Singapore in green, India in brown, and China in red. And the way this graphic works is that the refinery process is shown down the middle, and then on the right-hand side of the chart, we have all of the refined products that have been made using Russian crude oil that are then sold into countries such as the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, European Union, Canada, and Australia. The report states that the EU, most of the G7 and Australia have banned or limited imports of Russian crude oil and oil products, which has led to a significant fall in Russia's oil prices and export revenues. However, these price cap coalition countries have increased imports of refined oil products from countries that have become the largest importers of Russian crude. This represents a major loophole that can undermine the impact of the sanctions on Russia. 1 year on from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the price cap coalition countries increased the imports of refined oil products from China by 3.6 million tonnes, or 94%, India by 0.3 million tonnes, or 2%, Turkey by 1.8 million tonnes, or 43%, the UAE by 23%, and Singapore by 33%. Price cap coalition country imports of refined oil products from these 5 countries rose by 10 million tonnes, or 26%, which equated to more than $20 billion, so an increase of more than 80% in value terms. The largest importer of oil products from these countries was the EU, whose imports amounted to around $20 billion. In the last 12 months, Australia has purchased around $9 billion, the USA around $7.5 billion, and the UK and Japan around $6 billion each. The highest proportions of imported oil products into oil price cap coalition countries were diesel, representing 29%, jet fuel, which represented 23%, and gas oil, which was 13%. As Russia was forced to offer discounted oil to ensure that it was able to find buyers, the countries named in this report are refining larger volumes of imported Russian crude and then export the refined products to sanction-imposing countries. This is currently a legal way of exporting oil products to countries that are imposing sanctions on Russia as the product origin has changed. However, this process still provides funds to Russia's war chest. Interestingly, 56% of Russian crude shipped to these countries has been transported by vessels owned and/or insured by the price cap coalition countries. And the share of those same ships is 74% for oil products exported from the laundromat countries from December 2022 until the first anniversary of the war. These figures illustrate the coalition's strong leverage to ratchet down the price cap level, as well as taking action to ban refineries buying Russian crude to refine it and then sell the products to sanctioning countries. This chart shows the value of crude oil shipments out of Russia over the course of the last 12 months. And the colour coding here, the light blue section at the bottom represents sales to the European Union, the orange section represents sales to Egypt, the brown section sales to India, The grey section are other countries, and that includes China. Originally, when this chart was produced, it did have separate details for China. However, it's now been amalgamated into the other section, which is slightly disappointing, but we have to work with the details that we've got. The green section at the top represents sales to Turkey, and then the red section at the very top is unknown. And what this chart shows is that 12 months ago, Russia was selling around $250 million worth of crude oil every day, and around 50% of all of those sales were going direct to the European Union. Now, as you can see from this graph, over the course of the last 12 months, the sales to the European Union have reduced to virtually zero due to a combination of sanctions that were introduced by individual countries and the outright ban that was introduced by the European Union on December the 5th on the purchase of all of these products. So if we look at the situation today, you can see that Russia is achieving a similar level of sales to what it was this time last year. However, the sales mix has changed entirely, and you can see that the biggest single change shown on this graph is the level of sales from India, which have increased dramatically. There's also been an increase from China, however, it's not shown separately. And this chart shows the daily sales of refined products that Russia has been selling over the course of the last 12 months. And what this shows is that this time last year, Russia was selling around $175 million worth of refined products every single day, and that around 2/3 of those sales were going directly to the European Union. Now, as with the previous graph, over the course of the last 12 months, we have seen a dramatic reduction in those purchases from the European Union as a result partly of the sanctions and also the outright ban that was introduced on February the 5th for refined products. And if you look at the total sales, you can see that there has been a reduction from this time last year. And once again, the sales mix has changed entirely. However, India hasn't increased its purchase of refined products as a result of the fact that it has its own refinery industry and therefore only wants to buy crude oil so that it can add value through that refinery process and make profit itself. And China is in a very similar situation. China doesn't want to be buying the finished products when it has the capability of making it themselves and keeping the profit. But what these charts do show is that Russia has managed to find buyers for its oil, and there's been a big increase from the countries that have their own refining capability. There are 5 major oil refinery businesses in India. Reliance Industries Limited is the largest private sector oil refining company in India and operates 2 refineries with a combined capacity of 1.24 million barrels per day. And this company is a significant exporter of petroleum products, including gasoline, diesel and jet fuel. Indian Oil Corporation is the largest state-owned refining company in India and operates 11 refineries with a combined capacity of 81.2 million metric tons per annum. This business also exports petroleum products to several countries including Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Mauritius. Bharat Petroleum Company is another state-owned oil refining company in India and operates 4 refineries with a combined capacity of 38 million metric tons per annum. Hindustan Petroleum Corporation is another state-owned refining company which operates 3 refineries with a combined capacity of 24 million metric tons per annum. Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemical Limited is a subsidiary of Oil and Gas Corporation Limited and operates a refinery with a capacity of 15 million metric tons per annum and exports products to a variety of countries including Singapore and the United States. As we've been discussing in this video, access to cheap Russian crude has boosted output and profits at India's oil refineries and enabled them to export refined products competitively to Europe and take bigger market share. India's imports of Russian crude in March rose for the 7th straight month, and Russia is now the single largest supplier of crude oil to India, displacing Iraq for the first time. Indian refiners, which rarely bought Russian oil previously due to high transport costs, imported between 970,000 and 981,000 barrels of oil per day in the year to March 2023, accounting for more than 1/5 of overall imports. Russia's flagship grade Urals made up the bulk of India's purchases. However, refiners are also importing lighter grades from Russia's Far East and Arctic grades, such as Sokol, Arco, Novilport and Espo blend. Russia's largest oil producer Rosneft and top Indian refiner Indian Oil Corp have signed a term deal to substantially increase and diversify oil grades delivered to India. As Europe's ban kept Russian products out, India's diesel exports to the continent rose between 12 and 16% to 167 barrels per day in the year to March 23. That accounted for around 30% of India's total oil exports, up from around 21% a year earlier. The key European buyers of Indian diesel are France, Turkey, Belgium and the Netherlands. Europe accounted for around 50% of India's jet fuel exports, or around 75,000 barrels per day, which is up by around 40,000 barrels compared with the previous year. India has also boosted vacuum gas oil shipments to the USA. The US took around 12,000 barrels per day of VGO, which equates to around 80% of India's overall exports of the refining feedstock that can be processed further to produce fuels such as gasoline and diesel. This chart shows China's exports of refined oil products over the course of the last 12 months. And what this chart shows is there's been a significant increase in the volumes that China has been exporting. And this is predominantly as a result of the fact that China has been buying in cheap Russian crude, passing it through its own refinery system, and then selling the excess in the international markets. And if we look at the current situation, China's imports of crude oil surged to the second highest on record in March 23, capping off a strong first quarter as the world's biggest importer of the fuel reopened its economy. Customs data shows that China imported 52.3 million tonnes of crude oil in March, which is the most since the all-time high in June 2020. The amount is equivalent to 12.4 million barrels per day, and brought total imports for the first quarter to 11.1 million barrels per day, a gain of 6.7% or 700,000 barrels per day from the same period in 2022. Now, originally the market viewed this increase in oil purchases as confirmation that China's economy was recovering. However, a leap in exports of refined products in the first quarter undercuts that view. Customs data shows that in March 23, refined fuel exports were 5.5 million tonnes, which works out to around 1.4 million barrels per day. And for the first quarter, China's refined product exports were up 60% to 18.2 million tonnes, equivalent to around 1.6 million barrels per day. And that compares to exports of around 1 million barrels per day in the same period of 2022, meaning that they've risen by 610,000 barrels per day over the last 12 months. Supplies of Russian flagship Urals crude oil to Turkey reached a 4-month high in February after Star Refinery, owned by Azerbaijan's oil firm Soca, resumed purchases of the blend. Increase of Russian oil exports to Turkey, which Russia considers as a friendly country despite Ankara's NATO membership, may hinder the West's attempts aimed at crippling Kremlin's financial might, may hinder the West's attempt to reduce the amount of revenue that Russia is earning. According to Refinitiv Icon ship tracking data, 860,000 tonnes of Urals crude were shipped to Turkish ports in February, up from 620,000 tonnes in January and 370,000 tonnes in December. Supplies of Russian oil to the 200,000 barrel per day Star Refinery resumed at the end of January after a month-long hiatus and reached 100,000 tonnes in January and at least 300,000 tonnes in February. Increase in Urals crude supply to Turkey will likely bolster the price of Russian blend, making India and China, which already saw record high oil imports from Russia, compete for the Russian oil volumes with Turkey. Now, one thing you may be surprised about is that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are buying Russian oil. And initially that doesn't make any sense because both of those countries have their own oil supplies. They're some of the biggest oil suppliers in the world. So why would they be buying Russian oil? Well, the main reason is that neither of those countries have applied sanctions against Russia. And what they're doing is taking advantage of the low price of Russian oil, buying it in and then exporting more of their own oil. So rather than using their own oil themselves, they're using Russian oil and increasing the amount that they're selling because obviously their own oil isn't subject to sanctions. So this is a perfectly legal way of both of these countries finding a way around the sanctions. Russian oil exports to the UAE have more than tripled over the course of the last 12 months to a record 60 million barrels, and Russia now exports an average of 100,000 barrels per day to Saudi Arabia and equates to more than 36 million barrels per year and compares to almost zero before the outbreak of the Ukraine war. The price of Urals crude oil is more than 30% lower than Brent crude due to the price caps and other sanctions imposed by the West. Arbitrage opportunities for the Gulf countries are even more pronounced in refined products such as naphtha, fuel oil and diesel. And over the course of the last year, Saudi Arabia has increased its diesel exports to France and Italy, two countries that previously relied heavily on Russia for those imports. According to the recent report, Saudi Arabia's imports of discounted fuel from Russia have largely met demand in its domestic market, and the country has been able to free up large amounts of diesel for exports to other regions. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video really to share with you the information as to what's happening with Russian oil. The whole reason that the West have introduced sanctions against Russia is to try to limit the amount of revenue that Russia is earning, with a view to getting Russia to come to some form of peace settlement in Ukraine. If Russia can't keep funding its war efforts, then at some point the war will come to an end. But what we've seen in today's video is that the international markets are finding a legal way around these sanctions. Crude oil is basically a raw material. In most cases, it needs to be refined before everyday use. And because countries such as China, India and Turkey have built up large refinery industries, they have the capability of converting the crude oil into things like gasoline and diesel. And the problem that we've identified in today's video is that it's impossible to be able to trace the origin of the crude oil. Once crude oil is unloaded from a ship and goes through the refinery process, it becomes a commodity item. And over the course of the last 12 months, countries such as India, China and Turkey have taken advantage of the fact that they can buy Russian crude oil at a discount in the international markets. And because they're able to convert that crude oil into refined products, they can then sell those refined products at market price. So they're buying their raw material at a 30% discount. And so that discount is enabling them to make super profits on the sales. And the sting in the tail here for the West is that they are the ones who are buying those refined products. So ultimately, all of the countries who have sanctioned Russian products are actually still buying Russian origin oil, albeit it's coming from refineries in countries such as China, India and Turkey. And to add salt to the wounds, we're even seeing some of the large oil-producing countries, such as the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, finding a way to benefit from this arrangement also. They've been buying in the cheap Russian oil, using that in their home markets, and then exporting more of their home-produced oil. So once again, this is perfectly legal. The UAE and Saudi Arabia are perfectly entitled to sell more of their own oil in the markets, and they're also entitled to buy Russian oil because they're not party to the sanctions. But once again, the bottom line impact is that Russia is still finding a market for its oil. Yes, they're having to sell the oil at a discount because the price caps are in place, but Russia is still managing to achieve those sales and bring in large quantities of cash, which goes against the principles of the sanctions. So we've been through the details on how these countries have managed to find loopholes in the sanction process, and the big question is, what is the West going to do about it? What are countries like the USA, the UK, Canada and Australia going to do to try to stop this situation continuing? Well, realistically, the only thing that can be done is to bring all of these countries around the table and have a discussion about what's happening. But it's very unlikely that countries such as China and India are going to agree to stop exporting refined products because that's their business model. They are doing it to make profit for the benefit of their own economy. And as it stands at the moment, there are no restrictions in terms of the amount of Russian oil that India and China can buy because they're not party to the sanctions. So this is quite a difficult conundrum for the West to be able to solve. And what we've essentially seen here is that Russia has found a way to keep selling large volumes of oil into the international markets, and ultimately the West is still buying that oil, albeit it's passing through somebody else's refinery before they take delivery of it. So the overall summary of today's video is that the methods that are being deployed by all of these countries, whereby they're using Russian oil as their raw material, has weakened the impact of the sanctions and means that Russia is still receiving large amounts of revenue for the sale of its oil. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments on this story. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.